My name is Emily Carter, and I'm 33 years old. A month ago, at 6:47 a.m. on a quiet Tuesday, I woke up to a text from my mother that simply read, "Mortgage is due, we need to talk." I stared at it for a full minute before I could even breathe. The family estate, our beautiful Victorian home in Chestnut Hill, had been fully paid off for years. So why was there a mortgage? To understand that text, you have to know the backstory. 3 years ago, my parents handed the keys to our family's prestigious architecture firm, Carter & Co., to my younger brother, Landon. Not just the firm, he got the house, the investment portfolio, the retirement accounts, everything. I got a thank you dinner. I'd spent nearly 15 years in that firm, helping build its reputation, expanding its portfolio, and rescuing it from at least 2 financial disasters. Meanwhile, Landon spent his 20s bouncing between overpriced internships, music festivals, and startup ideas that never made it past the domain name. When my father, Richard Carter, announced that Landon would be the new CEO and owner of the company, I remember the exact words he used. "Your brother carries the Carter name into the future. He deserves this." I was stunned, not just by the decision, but by how final it was. My mother, Evelyn, said nothing during that dinner, only pushing peas around her plate like a guilty child caught cheating. So I walked away, not just from the company, but from the illusion that hard work would earn me a seat at the table. I moved to Chicago and started over from scratch, building my own consulting firm, quietly, steadily, with no family name to back me up. But now, 3 years later, my parents were reaching out again, asking for help, financial help. That morning, after reading that message, I made a decision. I wouldn't reply, not yet. Instead, I poured myself a strong cup of coffee, stared out at the city skyline, and thought about everything I had built since they shut me out, and whether I owed them anything now that their golden boy had run our legacy into the ground. Before I tell you what happened next, leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And hit that like button if you've ever been the one holding everything together, only to be discarded when it was time to hand out the rewards. Growing up, I always knew there was something different about the way my parents looked at Landon. I was 7 when he was born, and I still remember the beaming smile on my father's face when the nurse declared, "It's a boy." He held Landon like he'd just inherited a crown, as if our family name had been waiting for a male heir to carry the legacy forward. That moment, it defined everything that followed. Our family's firm, Carter & Co. Architecture, had been built from nothing by my grandfather Leonard Carter after returning from World War II. He sketched blueprints on the back of napkins, designed schools and hospitals in post-war Philadelphia, and turned a small 2-man operation into a city institution. When my dad Richard took over in the late 80s, he brought the business into the modern era: corporate clients, commercial high-rises, green technology. It was my playground growing up. I'd sit on drafting tables, listen to design debates over dinner, and pore over blueprints like they were storybooks. By the time I was a teenager, I knew I wanted in. I loved the idea of building something that would last. Not just walls and windows, but legacies. But Landon, he was treated like the firm's destiny before he could even spell architecture. For his 10th birthday, Dad had the team build him a miniature design studio in the backyard, complete with a work table and computer. That same year, I turned 17 and got a card with $25 and a "You're so responsible" note. When I brought home straight A's, Mom would say, "Of course you did," and then turn around to celebrate Landon's C in chemistry as if he'd won a Nobel Prize. But it wasn't just the academics. It was the dinners, the vacations, the attention. I was the one helping Dad organize blueprints and client notes, while Landon got private tennis lessons and weekend trips to NYC. I tried harder. I studied architecture at Penn State, graduated top 3 in my class, interned at prestigious firms in Boston and DC, and then came back home thinking I'd finally earned their respect. But when I joined Carter & Co., I wasn't welcomed as the heir apparent. I was given an entry-level role with a salary lower than recent college hires. Meanwhile, Landon, still 2 semesters short of graduating with a communications degree, was already sitting in meetings with high-profile clients. Dad said, "You need to learn every part of the business from the ground up." But that rule didn't apply to Landon. He got a company car and the title Director of Client Innovation. I got a desk in the supply room and a passive-aggressive email about not labeling storage bins. Still, I stayed. I worked late. I studied our workflows. I saved the firm tens of thousands by streamlining vendor logistics and even brought in new clients through my personal networks. And every time I brought those results to the table, I'd get a polite nod. before Dad turned to Landon and asked what he thought of the company's branding aesthetic. Looking back, it wasn't just favoritism. It was a deep-rooted belief that leadership had to look a certain way, male, charismatic, born into it, not earned. But I kept hoping. I kept believing that one day my work would speak for itself. I didn't realize then that in this family, words, especially the ones tied to your last name and your gender, carried more weight than results ever would. I often think about the irony of it all, how I poured myself into a business that never saw me as anything more than the supporting character. In college, while Landon lived in a luxury apartment paid for by my parents, I juggled 3 part-time jobs. I paid for my own books, meals, and even my studio materials. When I asked Mom once if they could help cover a $300 software program I needed for class, she said, "Sweetheart, we've already done so much for you. Be proud of your independence." Independence. That word clung to me like a label I didn't ask for. Landon, on the other hand, took a sabbatical after sophomore year to explore music production in LA, which my parents funded like it was a graduate program. I still remember the photos he posted on Instagram: pool parties, backstage passes, one blurry selfie in front of a mixing board with the caption, "Manifesting Greatness." While he manifested, I built. And when I graduated with honors and 2 internships under my belt, I returned home and walked through the glass doors of Carter & Co. thinking, this is it. They'll see me now. They didn't. They saw me as someone useful, organized, efficient, the girl who would make sure things got done, but not the person you'd trust with vision or leadership. One summer, during a particularly brutal commercial project, our lead project manager quit mid-build. The deadline was looming, penalties were stacked, and the client was panicking. Dad asked Landon to step in. Landon, who didn't even know how to read a Gantt chart, said he was booked on a networking trip to Miami. So I stepped up. I worked 16-hour days, restructured timelines, renegotiated vendor contracts, and kept the crew motivated through heat waves, budget cuts, and missing materials. We finished the project 2 days ahead of schedule and $60,000 under budget. At the ribbon cutting, the CEO of the client company shook my hand and said, "You're the reason this got done," Dad overheard. He smiled politely, clapped Landon on the back, and said, "The Carter boys know how to deliver, huh?" I stood there plastering a smile on my face while my heart sank. It wasn't just about being overlooked. It was the realization that no matter how much I gave, no matter how much I proved myself, I would always be the scaffolding, not the structure. And yet I stayed. Why? Because I loved that company. I loved the projects, the process, the people. I loved building something that mattered. I even loved the old brick building that housed our offices with its squeaky floors and sunlit windows. So I stayed. I worked harder. I gave up vacations, holidays, weekends. I told myself eventually they'll see. Eventually they'll realize I'm the one holding this place together. But the truth is, some people only see what they want to see. And they wanted to see Landon, even if he was driving everything we built straight toward disaster. I should have known something was off when Mom called and asked me to come to Sunday dinner a little early. There was a strange tension in her voice, like she was trying to hold something back, but didn't quite have the strength. I showed up 15 minutes early as always with a bottle of my dad's favorite bourbon and a copy of the finalized contract I had just negotiated, a 3-year commercial deal with a chain of boutique hotels that would secure Carter & Co. millions in revenue. When I walked into the house, I grew up in the same Victorian home. I'd memorized every creak and corner of it looked the same, but something felt off. Landon arrived 20 minutes late as usual. No apology, just a dramatic yawn, and some story about placing a deposit on a boat. My mother lit up as if he'd just announced she was becoming a grandmother. As we sat down to eat, I waited for someone to ask me about the deal I'd closed, about anything. But the conversation stayed glued to Landon's latest networking event and his big vision for the company. Then Dad cleared his throat. "We have an announcement." I froze. Was this it? The moment I'd been quietly working toward for over a decade. "Your mother and I have decided it's time to plan for succession. We're stepping back from day-to-day operations." My heart pounded. I already had a plan, ready transition documents, proposed team structures, even a rebrand strategy. This was it. And we're proud to say that Landon will be taking full ownership of Carter & Co. effective immediately. I couldn't breathe. We're also transferring the house and our investment accounts to him, so he can continue growing the business without interruption. My hands trembled under the table. Mom glanced at me, then looked away. "We just want what's best for the company," she whispered. "What about me?" I finally asked. Dad's face didn't even flicker. We're offering you a generous severance 3 months' pay and the company car. You've done good work, Emily, but this business needs to be led by a Carter man. I am a Carter, I said, stunned. Until you get married, he said flatly. Besides, Landon has vision. Landon actually had the gall to smirk and say, "Don't worry, sis. I'll find a spot for you in the new org chart, HR or something." I stood up so quickly I knocked over my chair. Landon doesn't know how to run this company. He's never delivered a project on time. Half the vendors refuse to work with him because he doesn't understand what they do. And you're handing him everything. Dad slammed his hand on the table. This conversation is over. The documents are signed. I looked at my mother. She stared at her plate. "We just want to keep the company in the family," she murmured. "You mean in the hands of a man." I left that house without touching my dinner, without saying goodbye, and without letting them see the tears already burning at the corners of my eyes. That night I packed up my home office. I knew one thing I was done being the backup plan. The next morning I drafted a resignation letter with steady hands and a hollow heart. I didn't bother to make it poetic, just the facts. 2 weeks notice, number effective immediately. Dad didn't even respond to my email. Instead, I got a message from the firm's HR coordinator. "Please schedule a time to return your company laptop and vehicle. Your severance check will be processed within 10 business days." After 14 years of blood, sweat, and innovation, my goodbye came via boilerplate corporate language and a cold auto-signature. On a Sunday, I returned to the office alone. The place was eerily quiet. My footsteps echoed down the same halls I used to walk proudly with blueprints under my arm. The same conference room where I'd led major contract negotiations was now cluttered with flyers for Landon's visionary brand reset, a rebrand that included a new slogan, Legacy Reimagined. I emptied my desk into 2 cardboard boxes. 15 years of my life reduced to 28 pounds of binders framed certificates, and a photo of me and my grandfather at the firm's 50th anniversary gala. He had always believed in me. He once told me, "You've got the heart of a builder. Not just hands and brains. You care. That's what makes you rare." I held that photo a long time before tucking it between a stack of old project proposals. As I drove away in the company car one last time, I passed the billboard just outside our office, Carter & Co., designing the future. And I couldn't help but think, not my future. When I returned the car to the dealership the next day, I used my own savings to book a one-way flight to Chicago. I didn't have a plan yet. No company, no connections. Just a resume, a reputation, and an unshakable resolve to never again let my value be defined by people too blinded by tradition to see it. The first few weeks were hard. I sublet a small apartment, lived off coffee and frozen dumplings, and went to bed most nights wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. But after everything they took from me, I still had one thing they couldn't strip away: me. I was no longer part of Carter & Co., but I was still a Carter, still an architect, still a builder. And if they didn't want me to be part of their legacy, then I'd build my own. Chicago was colder than I remembered. Not just in temperature, but in tone. No familiar faces, no comfortable rhythms, no office where people knew my name or valued my instincts. But there was something liberating about that blank slate. For 2 weeks I let myself grieve. I cried. I screamed into my pillow. I binge-watched mindless TV and ate nothing but takeout Thai food. I wrote long unsent letters to my parents and Landon pages full of betrayal, resentment, and grief. Then I opened a new Google Doc and titled it Carter Strategies. Not Carter & Co. and not Carter & Associates, just Carter Strategies. It was mine, all mine. I built a website that night, a clean, minimal design. I wrote my own copy. We don't build buildings. We build solutions when timelines break, budgets crack, and no one knows what to do next. The next morning, I printed 100 business cards and cold emailed 37 people in the Chicago construction and real estate scene. By the end of the week, I had exactly 0 replies. I knew this wasn't going to be easy. A woman starting a solo consulting firm in a male-dominated industry with no local connections, not exactly a warm welcome committee. But then a month in, I got a call. A medium-sized developer had fired their project manager mid-construction and was hemorrhaging money on a 10-story mixed-use build in Logan Square. They were desperate. I offered to come in at a reduced rate with a bonus structure tied to actual results. Desperation is funny. It doesn't care about pedigree. It only wants solutions. I worked 16-hour days, rewrote the production schedule, pulled permits that had fallen through the cracks, found subcontractors willing to step in last minute, identified cost overruns, and cut $150K in wasted material spend. We finished the project only 10 days behind the original schedule, which under the circumstances was a miracle. When the building opened, the owner shook my hand and said, "You saved us." That was all I needed. Word of mouth started doing what business cards couldn't. One client turned into 3. I carved out a niche as the fixer, the consultant you called when things were falling apart. 6 months in, I hired an assistant. By month 8, I was running 3 projects at once. And that voice in the back of my head, the one that used to whisper, "You'll never be enough," grew quieter with each deal, each contract, each nod of respect I earned without having to beg for it. I wasn't rebuilding what they took from me. I was building something stronger. Something that couldn't be handed over or taken away or tied to someone else's last name. This was mine. And I wasn't done yet. 8 months into my new life in Chicago, things were finally beginning to settle. I had moved into a 1-bedroom condo, modest, but with just enough charm to feel like home. My business, Carter Strategies, was turning a steady profit. I had 3 active clients, a growing referral network, and 2 part-time project assistants. Most days I was too busy to think about Philadelphia, until the day Martin Chen called. Martin had been Carter & Co.'s lead estimator for 22 years. A quiet genius, meticulous with numbers, and deeply loyal, one of the few people who had ever treated me like more than a placeholder. He didn't even say hello. I quit. "Martin?" "Ryan, sorry, Landon fired Dolores last week, and Jim. Said they were too expensive. Dolores has been there since your grandfather's time, Em." My stomach sank. Is my dad okay with that? Your dad's pretending not to notice. Evelyn's back to handling payroll. Contractors aren't getting paid. Ryan keeps talking about a brand pivot and has some influencer girlfriend doing Instagram takeovers of the company feed. I closed my laptop and took a deep breath. What else? What followed was 20 minutes of slow-motion horror. Landon had eliminated experienced project managers and replaced them with his college buddies. He'd dismantled the sustainable design division I'd created, calling it too niche. He'd canceled safety trainings to cut costs, and instead spent thousands on a rebrand campaign involving rooftop drone videos and TikTok dances. The company's finances a mess, reputation crumbling, employees furious. "It's not a company anymore," Martin said softly. "It's a playground, and now it's on fire." I thanked him for the call, promised to stay in touch, and hung up. And then I sat very still. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't even feel angry. I felt sad. Carter & Co. wasn't just a company. It had been my family's legacy. It was where I learned to read blueprints, where I snuck extra snacks during client meetings, where I'd once believed I could prove myself worthy of a seat at the table. Now it was burning, and the only person who could put out the fire had been shoved out the door. But here's the thing about fire: sometimes it doesn't just destroy. Sometimes it reveals who was really fireproof all along. It was a Tuesday morning when it happened, nearly a year to the day since I walked away from Carter & Co. I was sitting at my desk in Chicago reviewing a proposal for a multi-million-dollar logistics center when my phone buzzed. A text. From my mother. We hadn't really spoken in 11 months. "Mortgage is due. Can we talk?" I stared at it for a long time. My hands suddenly felt cold. The house had been paid off once. Debt-free for over a decade. My grandfather's pride and joy. He'd planted every tree in that front yard himself. I responded with a simple question mark. 3 dots popped up, then disappeared, then returned. "We had to refinance to help the company. We're behind on payments. Ryan says it's temporary. Please, Emily. Your father won't admit it, but we're in trouble." I locked my phone and stared out the window. It was happening just like I'd known it would. Landon had run everything into the ground, and now they were coming back to me, not for forgiveness, but for a lifeline. That afternoon, my dad texted, "We need to talk. Business matter." I almost laughed. The man who once said I didn't belong in the future of the company was now reaching out for help. That evening, I sat in my condo, lights off, laptop open, trying to decide how to respond. I could ignore them, completely justified. I could wire some money. A quick fix enabled the same dysfunction. Or I could face them with boundaries this time, on my terms. So I called. Mom answered on the first ring. Her voice was frantic with relief. "Emily, thank God. I've been trying all day. We're 3 months behind. The bank is threatening foreclosure," Ryan says. "Stop," I said. Calm, firm. "Where is Ryan right now?" Silence. Then, "He's in Florida. He said he's meeting with potential investors, but he hasn't been answering your father's calls." "Of course." "Put Dad on," I said. He sounded old, shaky. "Emily, thank you for calling. We need your help, not just financial. The company, it's in trouble." What he laid out over the next 45 minutes made my blood run cold. They had mortgaged the house, liquidated their retirement savings, Payroll taxes were delinquent. Subcontractors were threatening lawsuits. Vendors had stopped delivering. There was no money left, no reputation, no plan. "We're asking if you'd consider coming back," he said finally, "to help us stabilize things. Maybe restructure. Maybe take on a leadership role." I paused. "And what would my role be exactly?" "Chief Operating Officer," he said, "full authority to make changes." Ryan would step back into a development role only. I laughed, not out of humor, out of shock. They wanted me to save the company they once said I had no place in. "And ownership?" I asked. "We could offer you 20%, he said, almost embarrassed. "Of a bankrupt company," I replied flatly. "Emily, please, be reasonable." "I am. You're asking me to leave a successful business I built from scratch to rescue one I wasn't allowed to inherit. If you're serious, send me papers for 51% controlling ownership. Immediately transferable. Otherwise, good luck with foreclosure." He went quiet. "I'll speak to your mother and Ryan." "Do that," I said. "And make sure Ryan understands if I come back, I'm in charge. No exceptions." For the first time in our lives, I held the leverage, and I intended to use it. 3 days later, I boarded a flight to Philadelphia. In my bag were 2 documents, one a consulting agreement with my standard rates and terms, the other a full transfer of controlling interest in Carter & Comer to me contingent upon verification of the company's financials. I didn't ask my parents to pick me up. I rented a car, booked a hotel downtown, and arrived at my childhood home like a visiting executive, not a daughter returning to the fold. The house looked tired, peeling paint on the shutters, weeds in the garden. The Carter & Comer sign that once stood proudly near the porch was gone, replaced by a sad patch of dirt. My mother opened the door before I could knock. Her hug was tight and trembling. I didn't return it. My father looked 10 years older. His once straight posture was hunched, his eyes bloodshot. A man used to being in control, now clearly drowning. "Where's Landon?" I asked. "He'll be here soon," Dad muttered, avoiding eye contact. Inside their once perfect living room was cluttered with financial documents, bills, foreclosure notices, unpaid invoices, court filings. My mother's hands shook as she poured coffee. "Before we talk about anything," I said, placing my briefcase on the coffee table, "I need full transparency. Every document, every debt, every lawsuit, no secrets." They nodded. For the next 2 hours I read, scanned, asked questions, tallied damages, assessed risks. When Landon finally arrived, he waltzed in like nothing had happened. Tan sunglasses on his head, designer sneakers squeaking on the hardwood floor. "Wow, family reunion," he said, smirking. "Nobody told me you were coming, Em." "Sit down," I said. He rolled his eyes and flopped into a chair like he was doing me a favor. "Let's talk about the $180,000 in company funds spent on marketing retreats in Miami," I said, sliding a printed bank statement across the table. His smirk vanished. "I was building brand presence," he muttered, "while employees went unpaid for 3 weeks, while subcontractors walked off job sites, while you mortgaged the family home and lied to your own parents." Dad spoke, voice low. "Emily, he made mistakes. No, he committed financial negligence, possibly fraud." I turned to Landon. "You're lucky I'm not reporting you, yet." He looked stunned for the first time, truly rattled. I stood and pulled out the documents. "You have 2 choices. I walk away right now and let the bank take everything. Or you sign over 51% of Carter & Comer to me immediately. I take full operational control. You work under me. No title, no credit card, no power. You do what I say, or you're out." Silence. Dad exhaled slow and resigned. "We'll take option 2. Even Mom nodded, wiping tears from her cheeks. Landon didn't move. "You've run this company into the ground, Landon," I said. "If you want to stay out of court and out of the tabloids, you'll cooperate." He looked to Dad for support. Got none. Finally, he grabbed the pen. "Fine." They signed. And just like that, Carter & Co. belonged to me. Not by inheritance, but by battle. The war wasn't over, but I had just claimed the high ground. I showed up at Carter & Comer headquarters the next morning at 6:30 a.m. The once polished office now looked like the aftermath of a frat party. Empty desks, dead plants, discarded branding materials for Carter 2.0. The only thing running efficiently was the coffee machine, and even that sputtered. At 7:00 a.m. sharp, I gathered the leadership team, or what was left of it, in the conference room. Mom and Dad sat quietly in the corner. Landon showed up at 7:17 wearing sunglasses and a hoodie, carrying a latte the size of his ego. He didn't apologize. I stood at the head of the table and said, "This is no longer a family business. This is a rescue operation." From now on, decisions will be made based on survival and recovery, not sentiment or seniority. If you're not prepared for that, you're free to leave. No one moved. Good, I said. Let's begin. Step 1, remove the rot. I terminated the executive roles Landon had created for his friends. Their responsibilities were redundant, their qualifications non-existent, and their salaries were bleeding us dry. Landon was stripped of all financial authority. No more company cards, no more access to payroll bids or hiring. He was reassigned to a new role, client liaison, reporting directly to me. His job was to attend meetings and keep his mouth shut. To his credit, he only sulked. He didn't storm out. Progress. Step 2, bring back the builders. I called 7 former employees, people who had quit or been fired under Landon's leadership. Martin Chen returned to estimating, Dolores to office management. Even Jim, our veteran project foreman, agreed to come back on the condition that Landon stayed the hell out of site meetings. Fair. Step 3, stabilize the bleeding. I froze all discretionary spending, reopened negotiations with vendors and subcontractors, created a weekly financial report that came directly to my desk, sat down with the bank to renegotiate our loan terms, using my reputation in the industry as leverage. Step 4, face the clients. I met with every single one who had canceled contracts or threatened lawsuits. I owned the company's mistakes, promised change, gave them new timelines, personally guaranteed results. 2 agreed to reinstate their projects under strict conditions. It was a start. Step 5, return to our roots. I reopened the Sustainable Design Division, my division, the one Landon dismantled. Within 2 months, we landed a green school project and a government-funded solar housing initiative. People were noticing. Clients were coming back, slowly but steadily. I worked 15-hour days, 8 meals at my desk, slept 4 hours a night. Every time I walked into the office and saw what it had become, I felt grief. But every time I saw Dolores crack a joke or Martin get excited about numbers again, I remembered why it was worth it. And Landon. To everyone's surprise, including mine, he began to adapt. Maybe it was humility, maybe it was survival, maybe he finally saw that charm had its limits. He showed up on time, took notes, built relationships. He didn't lead. But for the first time, he listened. 6 weeks into the restructure, he stopped me in the hallway and said, "You were right, I wasn't ready. I screwed up everything." I nodded. "Yes, you did. Now fix what you can." He nodded back and walked away. No defense, no excuse, just quiet accountability. It didn't undo the past, but it was a start. And for the first time in years, so was I. 3 months into the turnaround, Carter & Co. was no longer in freefall. We weren't soaring yet, but we were stable, profitable even. The bank had lifted our restrictions. Clients were paying their invoices on time. Vendors were delivering materials again without requiring upfront deposits. It wasn't just about money. The energy in the building had changed. People made eye contact again, laughed at lunch, trusted each other. I'd forgotten what a healthy company felt like. I split my time between Philadelphia and Chicago. My team at Carter Strategies was still thriving, and I wasn't about to abandon the business I built from scratch. But now I walked into Carter & Co. headquarters, not as an outsider fighting for scraps, but as the boss. One crisp Monday morning, my father showed up to the office unexpectedly. He looked better than he had in months, more color in his face, a steadier step. He knocked lightly on my office door. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Sure," I said, putting down a project file. He sat in the chair across from me, the same one I used to sit in during reviews, nervous, desperate for validation. Now the roles had reversed. He looked down at his hands for a moment, then up at me. "I was wrong," he said. "I didn't say anything. About you, about leadership, about what this company needed. I let my pride and tradition cloud what was right in front of me. Still, I said nothing. You saved this place. You saved us. Your mother and I, we talk about it every night." He paused, eyes glassy. "We thought we were preserving a legacy, but what we were really doing was destroying it, and you're the one who brought it back." I took a deep breath. "I didn't come back for you, Dad," I said. "I came back for the people who work here, the ones you and Landon forgot. The ones who built this company just as much as Granddad ever did." He nodded slowly. "I know, but I want you to know we see it now. We see you." It wasn't the grand apology I had fantasized about, but it was real, and it was enough. Later that week, I hosted our first company-wide town hall since the transition. Everyone gathered in the conference center, old faces, new hires, even contractors who usually hated meetings. I stood on stage and looked out at the room. Not as the assistant, not as the afterthought, as the leader. When I was a kid, I used to sneak into my grandfather's office and flip through blueprints like they were storybooks. I believed buildings could talk, that they carried the stories of the people who created them. But what I've learned is companies do the same thing. They reflect the people at the top. If that reflection is arrogance, favoritism, or fear, the whole structure starts to crack. We let that happen, but we're rebuilding, and this time we're doing it the right way. They clapped. Some stood. I spotted Martin, arms crossed, grinning. Even Landon in the back row offered a quiet nod. For the first time, I didn't need their permission to lead. I had earned my place, and no one could take it from me again. A full year after that desperate text, mortgage is due. Can we talk? I received another one from my mother. The company showed a profit this quarter. Thank you for saving our legacy. I stared at the message for a moment before putting my phone down, because the truth is I hadn't saved their legacy. I had rebuilt mine. In Chicago, Carter Strategies had just signed 2 of the largest clients we'd ever had. My small office team had grown into a tight-knit force of engineers, planners, and consultants, most of them women, many of them overlooked in their previous roles, just like I had been. We weren't the biggest name in the industry, but we were the name people called when they wanted things done right. I still owned 51% of Carter & Co., but I no longer needed to be in Philadelphia every day. I installed a seasoned operations executive as CEO, someone who understood both structure and culture. I visited once a month, sat in on big meetings, offered guidance. It no longer consumed me. It no longer defined me. It respected me. My parents eventually sold the family house, downsized to a modest condo by the river. They paid off the debts. Dad retired for good. Mom took up pottery. Landon stayed on at Carter & Cohen's in a much smaller role, handling client development under close supervision. He still drove me crazy sometimes, but he worked, showed up, stayed humble. We never became best friends, but we became something better than enemies. We became honest. One afternoon, I found myself cleaning out a drawer in my Chicago office and stumbled upon that old photo of me and my grandfather, him, with his arm around my shoulders, me clutching a sketch pad, both of us beaming in front of the very first Carter & Co. building. And I smiled, not because I missed what was, but because I had finally become what he always believed I could be, a builder. Not just of buildings, but of futures, of companies, of confidence, of a life where my worth wasn't dependent on tradition or anyone else's last name. I framed that photo and hung it above my desk. And that night, as I sipped tea and looked out over the skyline I now called home, I replied to my mother's message. It was never about the legacy. It was about recognizing worth where it exists. I'm glad you finally see mine. So what about you? Have you ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to know you best? Have you ever had to fight for the recognition you earned in the very place you helped build? I'd love to hear your story. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more real-life stories of strength, boundaries, and becoming your own legacy. Because sometimes the people who should have supported you the most are the ones who only see your value when they almost lose you. Thank you for being here.